Hello, Nadja. Thanks for joining the call. And hello, everyone who's watching right now. I hope you and your family are okay during this COVID-19 outbreak and the lockdown. And, for myself, I found it personally difficult to adjust in the beginning. But in the end, I did not want to delay this podcast any further, as topic today is about internet addiction and gaming addiction, which I feel will resonate more so with people now that we are confined to our homes. So, for those of you who don't know, Nadja Streiter is a psychotherapist and parent coach in Westport, Connecticut, where she founded Eyes Up Wellness. Her expertise is in treating problematic internet technology use and video game addiction. In addition to being a regular speaker on the topic, she is programs director at Games Quitters, where she co-created their parent program, Reclaim. In addition to her professional background, she also has direct knowledge and experience as a mother of 3 children who have grown up during the current technology-driven era. She is a member of the Digital Wellness Collective, the National Association of Social Workers, and is an active participant in numerous activist groups orientated towards the development of ethical and humane technology. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing her knowledge and expertise. So, firstly, Nadja, just want to check in with you first because, given everything that's happening, I just want to know if you're okay and your family's okay and everyone's all right.
Everything is okay. I'm really excited to have a chance to talk to you about this topic today because, as you said, it is very, very relevant and rapidly changing given what's going on with the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. So, and thank you again this morning for having me.
No problem. Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. And yeah, I mean, like I said before, it's been quite difficult for me in the beginning just to adjust with all the restrictions. But I definitely didn't want to keep delaying this podcast any more than I have done already. But apologies for that as well. I just had to constantly reflect on kind of the level of change I wanted to bring with this, with all this channel and the website and everything. But I'm glad we're here anyhow. So the first question I have for you is regarding your background, your research, having looked into you and looking at your background. I'm just very curious, what was your motivation to explore the ways in which we can become addicted to gaming and technology?
Well, I'm the daughter of a sociologist, so it is really in my nature to track societal shifts and to make observations and to be curious about how changes that I see will create long-term impact. I started to become really concerned about technology and video games because the developers were very aggressively looking to create technology with the use of persuasive technology. So it wasn't just passive, we weren't passively engaging, we were being drawn to be engaged. And as somebody who's trained in social work, that's my master's degree, we sort of were always taught whenever there was a shift to follow the money trail. And so when there's profit involved, then there is, of course, a desire to engage as many people as possible. I also started thinking about just what the long-term economic impact would be, in the U.S. That was what I was thinking about, due to reduced productivity and what seemed to me to be was going to be inevitable burnout and distracted parenting. How would these distractions and demands, and of course, infinitely more fun activities, affect parenting, affect relationships, affect creativity, and so on? So that's kind of my, larger. That's where my larger interests started.
Interesting. I remember you saying briefly, you mentioned persuasive technology. Is that what do you mean in terms of persuasive design? Is what you meant?
Yes, persuasive design.
Interesting, right? Because it very much relates to currently my career path that I'm looking to get into is alongside user experience. So I'm interested in the fact that you've actually looked into that as one of your motivations for looking into gaming technology, and quite rightly so. It's quite a lucrative industry, and so where the money is, you'd want to know, especially how does that affect, since it's popular for kids, even for adults. So it makes sense why we want to be asking questions in this industry, especially. And like you said, being a parent of three kids, and having witnessed your own behavior change as a result of your new BlackBerry at that time, what were concerns for society as technology continues to develop?
Well, I think one of the first things that came to mind for me is, again, sort of the distracted parenting, because I thought that when my kids were younger and I'd push a stroller and I would be interacting with them and talking with
Mm.
them, they were pre-verbal. They didn't really have much to say back. So
Right.
so, and then, some of my conversations and interactions with adults were limited to if I came home and then I'd have a telephone call. But I couldn't be reading the news while I'm pushing a stroller. If I'm reading the news or playing a game, or have the option to. I mean, I'm imperfect, I'm fallible.
Hmm.
More interesting and engaging thing I am going to be drawn to. What also became of concern to me is once I was able to, on a mobile basis, receive emails. So then that presented as soon as you read the email, and for me, emails really almost always represent a demand.
Right.
Even if it's something positive, it requires a reply. Generally, it's just purely a demand or a request for something. So if
Sure.
demands can be made on me, more frequently, on all the time, whenever I'm in my car and whenever I leave home, those same demands that can be made on me that I would also, would prior to having that technology could only occur when I looked at my computer. I realized that that puts pressure on me, and then suddenly I'm on a hamster wheel, and I've got to run a little faster and a little faster and a little faster, because
Mm.
every answer, it's like a hydra, then creates three more emails or requests or demands. So I thought that that's an unsustainable pace, and as that pace, were to increase, that would become unsustainable. And quite frankly, I had this sort of fantasy that every society has had its, civilization has had its downfall, and it was unpredictable what it was going to be. I wondered if technology would ultimately, just because it would create an unsustainable pace, be the downfall of Western civilization. And I say that sort of jokingly and sort of not jokingly,
Right.
but I never, now we have other challenges. Maybe technology is also going to save Western civilization. So I'm really, really interested in seeing how this plays out.
Interesting. Going back to what you said when you were talking about, your own behavior, how you were quite authentic in your use of technology. You just, when someone sends you an email, for instance, there was a direct expectation, you had to respond to it because, I suppose when technology was introduced to you, you took that within your stride. It wasn't as if you took it for granted because you had so many notifications coming back and forth here and there. And so that's why, in a sense, you were more grounded in your purpose in using it, and therefore you took the extra bits and tools to communicate with others as just background noise and extra distractions. Whereas for me, growing up, perhaps I just grew a bit more accustomed to all that background noise. And so in the end, it led to kind of behavior, what we're seeing today in terms of like people ghosting each other, people just not bothering to answer texts and things like that, because we're just taking for granted the fact that we're all in communication so much that we just don't bother communicating, which is kind of ironic in a way.
Well, two things that, I remember a time before that was the case. So,
Indeed,
again,
yeah.
look, if I wanted to use technology other than making a phone call, really, I'd have to go home. I'd have to, if I wanted to message, it had to be really on a desktop. So, I saw the transition where that's been, your life, from the get-go. So by the time you were
Exactly.
able to have an email, in the beginning, I was getting maybe 50 emails a day.
Sure.
Now I'm probably get 1,000 emails a day. What I'm really fascinated by is in the last couple of years, I've noticed that I get so many emails, and I'm not alone in this, that people who need you to make sure to check and respond to an email in a timely fashion will send you a text message to let you know that you need to check that email and respond to it. I
Yeah, it's just
think that is incredible that there's this double layer because, we all
mm,
have so many emails that now somebody's got to tell you, please make this a priority. And the way they do that is via another LinkedIn message or a text message to say, hey, heads up.
yeah. You know what? In fact, at work, there's a situation this week, in fact, where we were doing calls through Slack, which is kind of like the
Yes.
MSN for work, which you've
Oh,
probably heard of.
I've
Yeah.
resisted that also. Yeah, it's another distracting.
Yeah.
And again, it's always a demand.
Definitely, like I literally have Outlook open, Slack open, and we have Skype for Business open during working hours. And my project manager, we were having a daily sort of meeting call in the morning, and he was debating whether we should should we do it through Skype or should we do it through Slack? Oh, forget Slack, we'll do it through Skype. And then we were messaging each other in Slack to ask them, have you joined Skype yet? And then it's kind of like what you're describing earlier. So there's just that need for instant feedback. We just, if we don't get it in one platform, we'll just jump immediately to another. And then there's just like no patience and trust in the other person.
A lot of employees also complain that, because they're required to use Slack at work, so you've got, the normal, pre-Slack distractions, which are emails from your colleagues, texts from your colleagues, your personal
Sure.
life, so on. But now you've got this whole internal system where people can be constantly disrupting, your flow and what you're doing, and the expectation is that you're going to respond or you're constantly needing to shift and make adjustments,
Yeah.
you're thinking because somebody else had now a brand new idea that they need you to incorporate. So I think of it as a faucet. It
Mhm.
takes sometimes you turn the faucet on, it takes a little while for the hot water to run. If somebody keeps turning the faucet off, and then, then you've got to restart the hot water
Yeah.
process. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. No, I think in our team sense, we made good use of it when it came to calling our clients because essentially to save us time, we decided, oh, we have them all on Skype Business. Let's just do a massive flurry of Skype messages instead, just to see if they've got the message. Then we can do follow-up calls as a way to check in afterwards, and that led to a more efficiency in terms of reaching out to them and making sure they had the message that they're receiving the delivery. So that was one way we were able to utilize it to our advantage. But like you said, it can also be a detriment to communicating when you're collaborating as well. When you're just kind of becomes distracting for you in the
Right,
workplace as well.
right.
But yeah, in terms of going back to what we're talking about in terms of just regular communication and technology in general, and now the gaming industry too. I remember over a decade ago, it was reported in the news that the gaming industry has overtaken the film and TV industry in terms of profit and success. And it goes back to what you're saying as well in terms of your motivations, looking at the profits, etc. But what do you think is so captivating about games? What makes gaming such an addictive hobby for children and even adults?
I mean, that's I can spend a whole day talking about that.
Okay.
And I think it's really important to say that gaming is a moving target. And so what makes gaming appealing, there's some standards that have not changed, but there are additional factors that have changed. So, that my answer to that question is really always evolving. But we can say that game development and games themselves have changed just from the perspective of reward and effort. So, rewards are doled out on a regular reward basis, but they're also doled out on a variable reinforcement schedule. And we know, science has demonstrated over and over again that when you receive something on a variable reinforcement schedule, it is the most addictive. And if you'd like me to give, I can give an example of that, sort of a slot machine. So you
Sure.
put a quarter, you put in a quarter, you put in a quarter, and you keep doing that, and you're not sure, when you're going to get a reward or how big this reward is going to be, and
Mm,
you're teased by getting a little reward. So then you feel good, and then you start then it's more quarters, and maybe you'll get another reward, or maybe you've got to keep putting quarters in to get that reward. But then you'll get eventually, the jackpot of some sort will hit and you'll get something back. So, the novelty, like we get bored when we know exactly what to expect. So that novelty of just not knowing when it's going to happen is very, very powerful. And then accessibility, of course, is real.
mm,
Like you don't have to make any effort to game, for the most part. You don't have to get in your car. You don't
sure.
have to meet a dealer on a corner. I mean, it's so accessible, and, that in and of itself, the fact that it's harder for people to have a real life achievement, or that there's so much increase in homes with conflict, and we see the divorce rate having risen. So all of these are factors in drawing people to this desire to escape, seeing a place where they can make progress and have achievement when it's not so easily attained in the real world, or it takes patience in the real world.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's very appealing. In addition, it's really become also highly social. And for some, young adults, and even not so young adults, and I know a number of young parents who are in their 30s, and after the kids go to bed, like they can play Fortnite together as the way of
Hmm.
socializing. You don't have to wait till Saturday night to hang out with your buddies. You can play Fortnite on Tuesday night at 9 o'clock and hang out with your buddies. So, and those are parents, for kids who socializing is, that's their number one priority, especially as tweens and teens. The ability to do that and the requirement to do that to fit in is very, very compelling.
Definitely. I can totally resonate to what you're saying because 10 years ago, when I was about 16, I was playing back-to-back Call of Duty, and that was when I feel online really rose up in terms of popularity because everybody wanted to compete online and in terms of first-person shooting. And going back to what you said about the reward factor, there was like achievements you would get where you wanted to make sure you got the right kill streak, not as a kill streak, but like headshots you got and the challenges. And I used to just be so obsessed with that, literally just playing hours and hours of gaming. Just it was just so addictive.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because, it was something that other people I'm sure were doing. So it gave you something to talk about,
Definitely.
like, not to be, I mean, I have to say there are some gender differences, but, like an easy topic for men to talk about is sports. Okay. But if you're not a
Mhm.
sportsman, if you're not a football fan or a basketball fan, then this gave another topic that was sort of a great equalizer in terms of conversation, to be shared amongst people. And
Sure.
not that it's exclusively men who game, but that is something that, I saw that as an additional, positive aspect that again sort of drew you in.
Yeah.
And you think about other skills, how long it takes to develop, getting to be good at something relative to being able to see how quickly you're getting kind of good at a
Yeah.
game. You see that progress bar, that's very addictive. And I do want to add one other thing in, you know, aggression was much more tolerated, historically than it is now. So if you're a young man or young lady in school and there's a fist fight in the playground is, grounds grounds for
Right.
expulsion. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we're really, really very strict about that now. And it's very difficult to find an outlet for aggression. And so,
Mm.
this really, I think, satisfies. And I don't, the literature hasn't, borne that out fully because again, this is relatively new. But I think that it also satisfies a desire that we have to discharge some physical, aggression. And it doesn't have to be angry aggression. It can just be, desire for physical activity and needing to get that energy out of your system, which
Yeah.
playing a shooter game allows you to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. In fact, what you were saying now kind of corresponds to what I was going to ask you next about when do you think games stopped being entertainment and started becoming addiction? Because you kind of mentioned that in terms of, okay, in terms of the reward factor, that's kind of what makes gaming become more addictive rather than just simply entertainment. And you mentioned the fact that it's kind of like a slot machine beforehand, which kind of feeds it. It's literally like that because you've got loot boxes now.
Yes.
Beforehand, there wasn't loot boxes. It was just, you have the online experiences and you didn't have to pay too much add-ons. But now, for me, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that they've monetized that value, and then people are suckering into it as well. The kids literally spending like hundreds in some cases on add-on features, just extra costumes and ridiculous stuff like that. And so I'd say that that's something you mentioned as adding to the addiction. And then now you also mentioned aggression, which, yeah, I can totally relate to as well. In fact, when I was 16, 17, around those ages, I'd get so frustrated when, I'd, go on a kill streak and then all of a sudden, so I'd just be shot dead, in an online gaming match. And my dad at one point, he even turned around to me and was just like, okay, why don't you just calm down, just enjoy the game. I was like, no, I was very, very like determined to get that kill streak. So I can totally relate. It was when you're really sucked into the zone, it stops being a game, it becomes more of a competition. So
Yes.
is there anything else you want to add to
Well,
which makes gaming more addictive?
well, achieving that state of flow is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, and so the effort that it takes to get to the state of flow, like you reach that state of flow when the reward and the effort are well matched together. And we really don't have a chance to do that very often. Like if you think about that in life, I was a tennis player, for example. So
Sure.
as tennis really only requires one other person to play with. But if flow for you requires an entire team, or requires very specialized equipment, so you've got to now gather all these people together. You've got to have the equipment to get there. Everyone's got to do it at the same time, and then you get that really great feeling of flow, which is extraordinarily psychologically satisfying. Think about if you can do that in your living room or your bedroom, like at the drop of a hat. So
Mm.
flow feels great. And just the desire to get back to that state of flow on a regular basis also makes it a very addictive substance, shall we say. Um, that's
Interesting.
a big
Yeah, yeah,
aspect.
no, I can definitely relate to that as well because I think in some games as well where you're just exploring, say, like an open world game, you're just lost into the story of the game, and
Right.
then you can play that even longer for hours because at least with competitive gaming, there's a set time. You got 10 minutes to shoot this many people in terms of like competitively, or in sports you have a certain time period, and then but in terms of open world games you have right now, where it's like a visceral, it's very captivating, the graphics, you could get lost in there for hours
Um,
and you still won't be towards an end point because there'll be so many side quests and things like that. So, yeah, I can definitely relate to what you're saying in terms of the flow experience.
well, so I think that there's also, um, thought leaders in this area are saying that it's that you can't really understand video game addiction or problematic gaming if you
Yeah,
don't so examine the genres. And so for some people playing a competitive game, like it depends on your nature. For some people playing a competitive game, that is going to be the thing that makes gaming addictive for them. It would be very easy for them to walk away from a story-based game. Where there are other people who enjoy fantasy
yeah,
and that competitive style game, that for them, they're happy to try, play for a few minutes, an hour, and then walk away. But they can get lost in the story. So, that's another factor that we have to consider when we think about treatment and, understanding video game addiction is what's the appeal for each different person. And then how
Interesting. Yeah.
individual games, become, more interesting to a different person. So, one might argue that if you've got someone in your home that enjoys competitive games, that you can say to them, okay, well, you can still game, but you're going to play, strategy games or story-based games and go have at it. And then they'll walk away on their
Right.
own, opposed to saying, absolutely no gaming in the home. It may not satisfy them in the same way, and that can be effective, I found.
Right. No, because this is the first time me hearing about personality differences being assessed in terms of levels of gaming addiction. Was that based on a paper you read recently, or is that something that you
I
heard elsewhere?
an article from recent couple of researchers out of South Korea, and I can get back to you with the names. I don't remember,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
but yeah, they because there's so much conflict now, and and then there was a lot of conflict prior
Right.
to COVID about whether there is such a thing as video game addiction or not. And so you've got
Wow.
people saying that it isn't. You've got people saying that there absolutely is. You've got people in between saying, well, it's just not that simple. And one of the ways that I again like to think about it is so if you're an alcoholic or if you're addicted to heroin, alcohol is alcohol is alcohol. The chemical the chemistry in alcohol remains unchanged.
Mhm.
Opioids basically remain unchanged. Where, Farmville and Words with Friends versus
Sure.
Call of Duty or, a different game, they're all really different. So, you're trying to sort of nail down a moving target in so many different ways. And these researchers thought that was an important factor in making some decisions about whether, and how to quantify addiction.
Interesting. So, given the fact that there's a lot of variance from what you're saying in terms of personality, in terms of the severity of addiction that is different for different people based on what their preferences are, if you were to reflect on your experience with your clients who had gaming addiction, were there any challenges you faced when trying to support their recovery?
Oh, a lot. Many, many, many challenges.
Right.
Well, and the challenges are really, really range. Family dynamics,
Okay.
can be an extraordinarily large challenge. So, parents they have low tolerance for their children feeling unhappy. So that right then and of
Mm,
itself takes away some of their power to create rules. Parents in general, as the technology has evolved, like this is part of how I think that all these things kind of like really dovetail together. Parents are
mhm.
busy than ever. They have more demands on them. They've got more, schedules. Economics are such that you've got often two parents in the home working instead of just one. So, it's a little easy if your child is entertained, and you might not want to admit that to yourself,
Right.
because if you are going to forbid gaming, which also then in some ways can be forbidding socializing for some children, you're in charge of providing the substitute activity. That takes time and that takes energy and that can take financial resources. So even if you're not, consciously willing to be aware of that,
Mhm.
that definitely subconsciously, plays a role. Some really dysfunctional families, unfortunately, always have to have a scapegoat in the home. So again, they will subconsciously support behavior that allows somebody to be, the dignified person in the family. So, and I can go on and on and on. Those are just two examples of, ways that family dynamics can play a role. If there's little opportunity for outside activities or for real world achievement, I think you and I both live in relatively urban areas. I mean, I live in a suburb, but it's relatively urban as compared to, rural area where there's much opportunity for real world achievement. Maybe
Sure.
you go to a high school that's very small. Maybe your town is very small, and maybe you're not athletic, maybe you're not talented theatrically, and so on. So
Mm.
you've got it's difficult to have this real world achievement. And then I find myself hesitant to say real world because you've got all these colleges and high schools lining up to offer esports programs and teams and after school clubs
Yeah, of
and
course.
adults doing that also. So now I say, well, okay, I'm not even sure that I can say it's not a real world achievement. If a stadium full of people watching something and you win, that's a real world achievement. So, these are some of the challenges because you've got, people giving pushback and saying that, well, this is real. But to some degree, it's also, when you're sitting and playing alone and you're watching your progress bar or you're on a streak, it's kind of not real because unless
Yeah.
you monetize it or create some fame from it, it's difficult. Yeah, that's scratching the surface, for me.
Sure. Yeah, no, so I mean, to rehash what you're saying, you're talking about family dynamics, about trying to foster that change internally within a family it can lead to a bit of conflict on your side where obviously they're happy for them to continue that behavior because it's kind of it's less problematic for them because they can go off and do their own thing, and it kind of creates a division within families, and because one person is just withdrawn and just carrying on their gaming lifestyle, and another person is just happy to continue their business until there's like a conflict somewhere, there's lack of communication, and from what it seems like in that situation, have you faced a bit of conflict, when you try to push that change and kind of get them to see a difference in perspective? Has that led to a bit of um,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
So, I mean, um, parents frequently, and I don't want to make this, I did a podcast about our parents to blame, and I don't
Right.
think parents are to blame. So I really say this, very carefully. But parents would much rather, would much rather just have you take their child and fix them and have them not be, they don't want to have to be bothered, with all the work that it takes to
Mm,
connect with their child, in the
mm,
way that is going to be supportive of change. Understand, for them, this gaming is like it's like a foreign, it's so foreign to them, they might as well be talking about living on another planet. So the
sure.
effort involved for them to understand what the gaming is, and then now we get into the genre and what is it satisfying for my child, and it creates a lot of demands on the parents. Parents often aren't equipped, just aren't equipped psychologically or aren't equipped, with time to
Sure.
manage that. So, that can really be difficult. And there is some research to demonstrate, for example, one of the reasons that these the programs were like rehab programs where you leave home and you stay someplace, for X amount of time and you're presumably rehabilitated and come
Right.
back. Very quickly, people return to gaming because you're not changing the environment. They return to the same family environment, whether
Yeah.
it's a couple, because spouse. There are a lot of marital, like, spouses who also have gaming problems. One's a gamer, one's
Sure.
not, so they can go through this whole process, but then they return to the identical environment that they were in beforehand. And of course, they revert. Um, and That's been demonstrated, over and over again in many substance abuse.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, in essence, what you're kind of saying as well is there's an unwillingness from the parent side to kind of take responsibility for the relationship in general. They kind of try to treat it as an external thing, kind of like um, what is happening to them rather than the result of. They're not looking at the underlying causes of, say, the relationship and trying to deal with the emotions directly of, say, is there an underlying issue? Like all of that is being ignored because they're just trying to pass it on to you and say, just fix it, as you said. Like,
And I think also they assume, that, let's say, with younger children, this is not an issue, but younger children also don't tend to be addicted to gaming. So,
sure.
time you've got a 16-year-old, let's say, or 18-year-old, maybe even slightly younger, the parents are, feeling very different about their parenting. They don't think that they need to be talking to their children sort of as if, they would say, talking to them like they're babies. But in
Mm,
many, many ways, you have to really rewind. And I say often, let's just pretend now that you're trying to connect on a different level and trying to improve your communication, that you need to talk to your child like they're a 5-year-old. Because, when you say you're not showing me respect, they have no idea what does that actually mean? What would that look like? But parents
mm.
look at this large child and they think you should know what that means. So, again, the work becomes getting them to define and getting them to define for themselves, because for every parent that's different. Some families can tolerate a stomp of the foot on the floor or a door slamming, and
Mm.
that's okay for them, and other families that's completely unacceptable. So, there does a lot of reflection on the part of the parents does need to take place.
Okay, we're back. We had some lagging issues with internet connection, but oh, well, I guess it's a rainy day. I don't know what it is. But I believe, Nadja, you were talking about one of the challenges of helping people to recover is to do with not addressing the underlying issues of mental health, I believe.
Right. Just addressing issues, how ADHD is playing a role, or if you've got any features tied to, or if you're on the spectrum, if
Yeah.
there's any history of trauma, so not resolving those issues is really also significant to supporting any long-term ceasing of problematic gaming,
Mhm.
or solving video game addiction. And I use that term gently, because I don't think that
Mm.
you have to necessarily meet the firm and existing criteria for video game addiction or gaming disorder and still not have a problem.
Sure. No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, just to kind of unpack in general, the challenges, we mentioned, of course, family issues of the resistance you'll get for family because they're just trying to pass off the issue to you to fix. We talk about not addressing underlying causes. You also talked about how there's a culture of online gaming has become, as important as a recognized achievement as external sports are, and to which I heard, you saying that, of course, you disagree. Everything should be offline, but I suppose I don't know. It depends. I suppose I heard other speakers mention the same things, and it seems, as well from what you're saying, there is a bit of judgment from both sides, from your generation in terms of, okay, we've never had to go through this, and so it's kind of odd for then the children to kind of be so drawn in and they can't relate to that, and then the children reacting heavily to that, and then it seems to be judgment back and forth. Do you think that's the problem as well?
Well, I think that that is definitely a problem, but so
Yeah,
you've got parents of like an older generation that really don't understand, and this is foreign to them. But now
yeah.
you've also got kids who they themselves have grown up gaming.
Sure.
So, they're navigating the challenge of they want a game, but
Yeah.
they also know that they shouldn't be exposing their children to too much gaming or the kinds of games that they like to play at an early age. So,
Sure.
they understand gaming, and they also understand that it can be addictive, whereas parents, who've got kids now that are, 16 and 17 and so on, this was not a conversation before. At least this is, information that's in the public domain. And,
Right.
just to try something, I don't, I don't think that this isn't the real world anymore. I don't
Sure.
think that it's purely not the real world, because when it's something that you start seeing occur in a stadium, when it's a major that you can have, and school has a team, that's the real world. Like, now it is the real world, even though you're playing with, virtual characters, and playing with virtual money. um, it's the real world. So
Yeah, no.
that,
Mm.
there's going to standing of that.
No, that's a fair point. I think, I suppose we're posing into question, what necessarily is real, and I suppose as long as it's real to the children, then that's something that should be taken into consideration, to form a bit of empathy between both sides, to see things from their perspective, that it's going to be hard for them to just wean off of it completely, because that's kind of their way to relate to their friends, even because everybody's doing it. So if they start to exhibit other behaviors, they'll feel slightly left out as well. And so it's important to kind of take consideration as well, like you said. And
Right.
yeah,
But it
I kind of moved. Sorry,
hijacked
go on.
by that, by the same token,
Yeah.
however, it can hijack your motivation, and it can, make you less inclined to deal. Like, if you have a lot of social anxiety prior to the availability of gaming and other technology, it was either
Sure.
be alone or go and deal with it. This allows you
Ah,
that
okay.
in between. So, there's a point of diminishing returns. As I told you, I used to be a banker. So there's this point
Right.
of diminishing returns where being able to have some social experience, but in a safe way, without a lot of risk, from home. But it has to be while you need to be simultaneously building that allow you to interact face to face without such high levels of social anxiety. So it can be helpful. You need to understand the point at which, though, then it hijacks your motivation to do anything about it, because why have face to face interaction if you can get most of your needs satisfied online? And that goes, for porn as well as gaming, and for social media and so on.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, no, it's interesting to mention that fact that, obviously we don't want it to be an emotional crutch for people, just as a scapegoat, or I mean, not a scapegoat, but essentially just a way to avoid your problems entirely, and to not deal with the issue directly, wherever it is, social anxiety or other aspects within your life, interpersonal conflicts. Um, Kind of, I suppose. One other thing I wanted to ask you as well is, I mean, reflecting on your client experiences, how long would you say it typically takes to recover from internet gaming addiction? I mean, what are the generic tips or advice you would give to people who are addicted to gaming and technology? Since we've talked about the challenges already, and it seems there are a lot of factors, but what advice would you give for those people?
Well, in terms of how long, a lot of that really depends on motivation.
Sure.
So if you've come to recognize that this is creating a problem in your life, and that you want to make the change, then your behavior, although it can be very difficult, and I don't want to minimize the difficulty of making that change, but if you're motivated to do it, it is much easier, because you'll take all the steps that you can. You'll grab the life raft that's offered to you, to position yourself for success. If you're, not motivated to change, then certainly it's going to be, like with any other behavior, going to take a really, really long time, if ever. I think that
Sure.
A factor that is very important to consider is, really identifying what needs is this satisfying for you. That gives a key, like shows us what direction to go in pursuing treatment. So, if the need it is satisfying is for interaction,
Mm,
then we understand that's what's absent. And so the focus becomes, trying to support and find as many ways possible, alternative substitutes to have interaction. If it's competition that it satisfies, well, then that's what you need to be looking for is opportunities to compete, to be in environments that allow, competition and reward from competition. So, it's sort of the scaffolding. What scaffolding is going to be available to somebody who is trying to recover or make changes in their gaming behaviors? I think, another tip I like to say is it's really important to pay attention to very small and, very small increments of change.
yeah.
People lose sight of if you were able to turn it off 5 minutes earlier, or if you were
Yeah.
to be able to delay your play, beginning to play for 5 minutes, that often goes unrecognized. But that's really big. And all of those
Mm,
little increments begin to add up. And, people tend to quit because they're not recognizing incremental changes. So they think it's not
mm,
working, whatever they're doing, or parents lose hope, spouses lose hope because, again, they don't recognize change takes a long time. So you've got to pay attention to these small changes. Um, Another real piece is what's the environment? Are you able to change the environment that you're in so that it does, in fact, support your not gaming?
sure. Yeah, so kind of unpacking what you're saying, you're talking about asking the direct questions, kind of what is their motivation to even exhibit that behavior? Are they using that to cover up a specific need, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of a need to escape, or in terms of a need for something else? So kind of asking that direct question of their reason, their
Right,
why, and then trying to seek an alternative to satisfy that need is
right,
one of the answers you mentioned. And also, you talked about, say, the family dynamic of trying to make sure that is going to be a supportive environment for that change,
right.
making sure you celebrate the small wins, the small victories of, small behaviors, because, that will be a more positive way and more realistic way to get sustainable change.
Right.
So yeah, it's not about judging it, it's about, recognizing the progress. So yeah, did I unpack that
Yes.
right? Anything else?
And again, recognizing that progress, even if that progress is very slow. And one, if you think about it, also what sort of makes sense is if you have parents who are, authoritarian and intolerant, they're
Sure.
very quick to, get angry and say, you're not changing and you're an addict and you're causing us all this grief and so on.
Mm,
So that is an environment which
mm,
doesn't support change. And those parents, and again, parents, spouses, need to understand that, there's kindness and compassion, and
sure.
curiosity that has to be, part of this, not this negative attitude. Because being in a negative environment makes you want to escape. Being criticized makes you want to escape and run to something that you're good at. So
Definitely.
certainly the person who doesn't want to be facilitating gaming is actually facilitating it.
Definitely. You know what? Throughout this talk, we've mentioned a lot about underlying causes, a lot about, mental health, and the fact that we are kind of using gaming to an extent to escape from our own emotions in a way, and kind of not be dealing with it directly. And, in my experience, looking back in the years, I think I can relate to that. I think there have been times where, even for me, when I was dealing with a lot of stress, or if I was dealing with a lot of emotional anxiety, or anything mental health related, I would find it easier when I was younger to just zone out with excessive gaming hours because, that was the easiest thing to do. It was harder to kind of talk about it, I think. So I wonder as well if children today may also look for that same digital distraction since it's easier than vulnerability in general. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that children are definitely looking to digital distraction, um, you know, and for a whole host of reasons, again,
Sure.
and I think, I do want to say adults as well. There isn't always somebody available to talk to, and I'm not saying a mental health professional, but you know, and often it's men, who are raised to be careful about expressing emotion.
Mm,
So, it used to be that women were deemed hysterical. That was 100 years ago. There was this diagnosis of hysteria. So,
right.
and women are called drama queens. So, they're highly expressive. But if you think about it, you're sort of shamed. You're shamed for being highly expressive. Males get messages not to be expressive. So, and it's tough, and if your parents haven't shown you, if they've always been there, sort of fix it and to rescue, and they haven't been able to just let you from an early age sit with uncomfortable feelings and know
Mm,
that you have an uncomfortable and an unpleasant feeling, and just like great feelings pass, so do uncomfortable feelings. Sometimes we just have to, sit with it while it passes and acknowledge that it's there. And also, teach some, better and healthy coping skills. That starts really early. I don't think there's enough parent or family, or premarital education that helps us to understand, the taking a breath, taking a step back, teaching your children to
mm,
communicate how they're feeling and letting them have the feeling instead of trying to fix the feeling, or,
right.
don't feel that way. And it's always, oh no, you don't feel that way. Like I hear that all the time, but
Yeah.
it's that way. So, you combine that with the need to have a device in your hands all the time just to be a functioning member of society, because
Sure.
everything's appified. Then there's digital distraction as a go-to, is natural, and it's hard to sit with your own feelings, and reflect.
Sure, that leads in nicely to the next question, in fact, because we talked about how it's a barrier for communication with others because that side of vulnerability is just it's difficult anyway, difficult as it is, just being honest and being able to sit with your feelings and be able to communicate them to people that may judge you or may not judge you, don't know. And then on the other side, you're talking about it potentially being a barrier to self-reflection and our ability to reflect on our own experiences. So, I mean, is there any other reasons you think, or have you observed anything that would suggest that gaming and technology would pose as a barrier to self-awareness or our ability to reflect on our experiences? It kind of links into what you said about, the need
So
for instant feedback.
I think
Yeah,
that as societally, and I can speak about Western civilizations, we're addicted to busyness. Like we're not
sure.
talking about that also because,
Ah,
I think sometimes we miss the bigger picture.
yeah,
We're addicted to busyness. So this is just in some ways another form of being busy. And when you're a society that's addicted to busyness and the messages are, if you're doing, if you're busy, you're not thinking. You can't be thinking about how you're feeling if you're
yeah,
constantly busy. So those are the messages that you're transmitting to everyone around you is stay
yeah.
busy. Stay busy one way or another, stay busy, avoid, avoid, avoid. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's the a byproduct of, valuing work ethic combined with technology allowing us to work harder than ever.
Yeah, definitely. No, I could totally relate because, in fact, since the start of lockdown, I think I found it especially difficult because that's kind of me. I was so used to being busy and I just didn't want to miss out on, say, next job on LinkedIn or next communication, social media, or anything that's constantly just bouncing around, just going everywhere. But then when there are restrictions in terms of where you're supposed to go and being confined to your home, I found that really difficult for the first few weeks because I was thinking, okay, this is a bit strange. And I had to sit with the feeling of, feeling like you got ants in your pants. You kind of like just feeling very jittery. And then after sitting with that, you just feel a lot more calmer and you just wonder, why was I running around so much for so long? And you're just kind of like, okay, I actually can do a lot. I can be a lot with, very little. I can, be okay with just doing minimal stuff and less things, less becomes more and you kind of get more out of the smaller things in a
Right.
way. So that's
There
what
was
I
an
noticed.
article in the New York Times this week about what does the good life look like now? Where the good life used to look like, being pampered a lot, hair and nails and jetting off here and, getting a
Yeah,
massage and so on. That's what the good life looked like. And, we're sort of, because of this stay-at-home requirement, having to re-examine what the good life actually looks like and what we really need, to make us happy, what perhaps was not making us happy, but we had lost sight that all that busyness, which we thought was good and made
yeah,
us feel accomplished, had reached its point of diminishing returns and was really creating a lot of unhappiness. So,
yes.
even trying to
Mm.
squeeze too much pleasurable activity into the day turns it into a burden.
Definitely. Yeah, can totally relate to that. And I feel like in a strange way, it's kind of forced us to really sit down and reflect on this. And we could technically, in some way, kind of turn this into a positive in a way. And kind of it can force us to change as a society and stop, being so addicted to the hustle, being so addicted to instant feedback, to technology in general to just focus on what we really need. It's forcing us to think about what we really need and what we really want. And I hope for a lot of people watching and listening right now, they are able to take that in consideration, given everything that's happened currently. And yeah, I mean, we have talked a lot about negatives regarding gaming and technology, and I personally don't want to be kind of fostering this belief that technology is but bad. It's kind of in the application of anything which determines its usefulness or its value. And kind of I was wondering to ask you as well, what would you say are any positives to gaming technology overall, since we've talked a bit about negatives and risks? Is there anything you could mention on the positive side?
Well, I mean, I think, and so much has really changed in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know what we're going to look like after.
Sure.
So, just to follow up on your point that there's lots of opportunity for positive to come out of everyone staying home.
Sure.
You know, of course, if basic needs, if there's an economic rebound and people's basic needs are no longer threatened, then we
Mhm.
should have an opportunity to step back and re-examine. We've got this beautiful technology, like it's
Yeah.
extraordinarily wonderful. I posted in the first week, it's ironic that the very thing that we trashed for disconnecting us is the very thing that's keeping us connected right now. So, technology and social media and so on. So, as gaming also evolves and, in that aspect, like Discord is also now starting to begin and Twitch, like have a social media, you know, um, feature to it, the ability to stay connected, the ability to expand beyond your, the geographical limitations that are given based on either your age or your ability to travel, like you can make friends with people from around the world now. And
Sure.
and you can interact with friends in doing something that you share and enjoy together at a time of day that suits both of you. And I think that's great. It's just a matter of keeping it, when it doesn't interfere with all the other basic things that you do need to do in your life.
Mm,
It can be an enhancement. I think gaming is a terrific enhancement. And again, not all games are the same. It's difficult for me to not have concern about violent video games. Uh,
sure.
but on the other hand, as I said before, to the extent that, kids have lesser and less opportunity to go outside and physically play, adults have less opportunity to go outside. And like, when was the last time you could go outside and actually play and play hard, and
Mm,
rough it? I don't know what, your sport was, but it's not so easy to do that. So you've got to stay contained in an office or a classroom all day long. Like,
mm,
you want to discharge. So I think that it can be healthy if it doesn't desensitize you to violence. But if you recall, the conversation over the last 20 years has been how television shows desensitizes us to violence. So,
yeah.
if that's true, then we need to be talking about television shows also and movies, and we need to consider how you can discharge aggression in a video game without it having to be so exploitive and violent. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it makes sense because, yeah, you're talking about, of course, it lies in the application. Of course, it's the fact that we are more connected. We can get an outside opinion so easily, from our kind of bubble, like the UK bubble. We're kind of that's one mindset, but then you talk to somebody from South Korea and you're kind of gaming with them, an online game. All of a sudden, you're outside of your little
Right.
paradigm. So it's easy in that sense to kind of, jump to another kind of way of thinking super quick and just get quick insight into someone else's way of life. Or through watching a YouTube video, or even gaming, collaboratively, like on online level as well. So that makes sense because then it can foster kind of open-mindedness in a
Right.
way for children, and more of a acceptance of different cultures as well, in a way, from what you're saying. And but of course, what you said as well regarding it lies in the application. So it's difficult to say, and it still needs to be assessed in terms of the content of the games, like you mentioned, in terms of violence, and not just across gaming, but all media channels for film, everything else. So yeah, well, that's basically what I took from what you just said.
Yes.
Um, so there's just one more question I have for you as well, in terms of, you kind of mentioned it earlier in terms of not being too stringent and strict on labeling people. Like, it's very, you want to make sure we're cautious with labeling people in terms of having an addiction, or having internet addiction or gaming addiction, for instance. But I mean, from what I've seen and heard, they have labeled that in the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health, and there has been some controversy regarding this. I think in general, there has been a lot of debate between psychology and psychiatry in
Yes.
general regarding, okay, should we label people? Does it help when treating somebody with mental illness, mental health in general? I mean, in the context of internet addiction, gaming addiction, do you think it's helpful to label someone in that way?
So it's really tricky because by using the label, then you inspire mental health professionals to learn about the topic.
Sure.
Um, that allows for treatment to be available to more people, treatment to be affordable for people. Here, treatment involves insurance and insurance reimbursement. So,
Sure.
giving it that label, you do allow for presumably more care to be available. But on the other hand, it's not person centered. I know that if I enjoy a couple of glasses of wine at night at dinner and somebody's telling me I'm an alcoholic,
Mm.
uh, you know, because gaming is not an illegal substance, like alcohol is not an illegal
Sure.
substance, because it's not, there are those that are going to argue that it is equally mind altering as, let's say, cocaine and heroin. And, my I mean, yes, you get a dopamine hit, okay, but you get a dopamine hit from sex, and you get a dopamine hit from food, and you get a dopamine hit, anytime you have an accomplishment that you've been working really hard for, and you would get there and you get excited, that's a dopamine hit. So,
Sure.
that is equal. So I struggle, I really, really struggle with the labeling because I don't know where the line is in terms of where it helps society enough versus harms individuals, because it's not really very person centered. And
Sure.
again, as I said, it's such a moving target. What the substance itself is just, changing and evolving all the time. So I think as long as it's understood that people really can develop extreme problems which have a significant impact on multiple domains of their life, as long as we acknowledge that and we provide treatment for that, that's fine for me.
Mhm.
If it has to be labeled addiction, then my only caution would be is that people should use that word very cautiously. Non
Sure.
should use that word very cautiously.
Sure. No, I understand what you're saying in terms of, I mean, from the offset and on a surface level, it helps professionals kind of get treatment for the person quick in terms of an organizational perspective. You've got, say, some patients and you give them a category. All of a sudden now it's easier to signpost them to the correct professional. So it makes
Right,
sense from an auditing point of view, perhaps,
right,
for hospitals, for people working collaboratively as professionals. But I suppose from what you're saying, it doesn't help the client, doesn't help the patient, the person who's who's receiving the treatment because they feel a bit, I don't know what to call it, stigmatized in a way because they're being forced to be identified with this label, and probably identifying with something is you feel trapped by it. And so in your
right.
case, perhaps just professionals should be cautious with using that label in front of the client. Maybe there's something internally they could do auditing wise, but keep the client or keep the patient out of that process. And perhaps just in terms of in therapy, it's more dealing with the person as an individual, like you say, with person-centered therapy. Have I understood that correctly?
I do know, and I think you make a really, I think that was really well said.
Mhm.
I think that people can actually be addicted to gaming. It's
Sure.
that those people that are in between and making sure that they're as well.
Right. Sorry, Nadja. I think we you cut off right at the start of the answer to my initial question, but just to kind of briefly unpack what you were saying, you were talking about professionals trying to be of service to the truth, and of course, it's a bit of a difficult debate in terms of addiction and how to categorize it, and there's behavioral addiction versus substance addiction that is taken into consideration too. I think that is that what you were talking about as well. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Right. But real
perfect,
addiction versus substance addiction.
great. And just for the sake of sparing this connection, I think that I'll just have to wrap up the questions for now. But yeah, this has been very, very insightful. Thanks again for your time. And for the viewers, I hope you found this helpful. If you do want more advice and content from Nadja, you can check her out on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, reach out to her via email. I include all the links in the description. If you want to see more podcasts and other content on cyber psychology, be sure to check out my website, scitechacademy.com, and also subscribe on YouTube. But for now, take care and take it easy. See you later.
Yeah, nice to see you.